We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by taking away their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation that we'll never get back. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with our spouse to avoid the suffering of a loveless marriage that might end up in divorce, or ultimately being stuck in a marriage when divorce is really what we want. We can also, as business owners, fire our top salesperson, who's the greatest top-line contributor in our business, to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth and losing all of our other top talent because they're the biggest cancer in our culture. You see, the reality of it is like this applies to everything in our life, but we are so conditioned to avoid those moments of pain, to avoid those moments of discomfort. And I believe that we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us.
On this episode of Establishing Your Empire, I host Brian Bogert. Brian is a passionate human behavior and performance coach, speaker, and leader who believes in helping growth-minded individuals achieve the best version of themselves, their most authentic selves. Brian's strategy is to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And he's helped individuals and companies break beyond their normal to achieve the success in life and business that they've always wanted. You're listening to the Establishing Your Empire show, a podcast that inspires entrepreneurs, creatives, and future business owners to pursue their passions, grow their organizations, and build their empire. My name is Daran Herrman, and creatively, I'm best known for my photography. But business-wise, my claim to fame is growing a company from $15K per month in online sales to breaking the $1 million a month barrier. And I'm sitting down with interesting people to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how they have established their empires. All right, I got Brian here on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Very excited to have you on the podcast. Why don't we just start off with give us a little bit background of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so excited to be here. Thank you for having this platform to be able to put good into the world. I love starting with being able to acknowledge that. It takes a lot of work, so that's great. I want everybody who's watching or listening right now, just close your eyes for 1 second. I'll tell you when to reopen them. I want you to imagine walking out of a store after a successful shopping trip, walking to your car, turning your head, and seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. You can open your eyes now. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were heading to the car, I've always had an excitement, vigor for life. It wasn't a surprise. I was the first one to the car. I got there and was waiting for my mom and brother to catch up to unlock the doors. You see, that was before we had key fobs. We had to literally put a key in the door and unlock it. But I'm standing there, and as I was waiting, a truck pulls up in front of the store. Driver and middle passenger get out, and the passenger all the way to the right feels the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, and he moved over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard, and before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot with no time for us to react. We were parked in an end spot, so we went up and over the median and the end spot, went up and over the tree, hit our car, and it yanked me to the ground. The truck continued to run over me diagonally, tear my spleen, leave a tire track scar on my stomach, and severed my left arm completely from my body. So there I am, laying in the middle of the parking lot on a 115-degree day in the middle of August in Phoenix. My arm is 10 feet away. My mom and brother watched the entire thing, and so did my guardian angel. You see, a nurse walked out of the store right when this happened. And fortunately, she saw the life and limb scenario that was in front of her, and she immediately went into action. She rushed over and put her hands on the wound to stop the bleeding, and also instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my arm on ice within minutes. Had she not done one or both of those things, I either wouldn't be here with you today, or I'd be here today, but without a left arm. And so I'm going to expedite the rest of that portion of the story, because I'm sure that a lot of people weren't expecting it to go there today. Right? I have a very unique story. But what I've realized in all this time of doing this is that we all have unique stories. And what's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories, and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. So I'll share with you, before we jump in further, 2 of those core lessons. The first is I learned not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And the second, I didn't realize until far later in life, because I spent so many of those post-accident years in a fog, right? I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. And although I was very aware of what was happening to me, I also was being led through the process. My parents, however, were not in a fog. They were intimately aware of everything that was happening. And the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great suffering for them. And so they willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, what was tough, what was uncomfortable. And they embraced the pain to ultimately heal and strengthen me. And so, although whether intentional or not, I don't know, but they ingrained in me a philosophy and a way of living because they taught me to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And I believe when this is done right, we also gain freedom. So this was the same concept that I used to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I built our last business from $250,000 to $15 million in the span of a decade. And now how I flipped it on its head as a human behavior coach, performance coach, and speaker to help hundreds of individuals and organizations just like you become more aware, more intentional, and who they already are, their most authentic selves. You see, when we do this, that's when the door begins to crack to perspective, motivation, and direction. And that's when magic starts to happen in our lives and joy, freedom, and fulfillment start to come in.
Man, that's such an intense introduction. I love it. So you were like 7 years old when this happened, something like that?
Yep.
Yeah. So I had a major accident as well, a 3-wheel accident, and hit a cord and lacerated my liver and my spleen. Hospital for a long period of time, stuff like that. Nothing as drastic as yours, but that's like a life-changing, life-altering thing at any age. So there's so many places to go from there, but I guess I want you to go a little bit more deeper into the embracing pain to reduce suffering, because I think a lot of people would hear that and be like, okay, I'm not sure what that means, or they might not understand it. So maybe give us a little bit more depth there.
Yeah. So the world tells us, right, to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain.
Right.
And the reality of it is it's like a natural evolutionary response too. Like we just tried to avoid pain to keep ourselves safe for a lot of years. If we look at the definition of pain, I think that's where it's best to start, right? When we look at pain, it's literally defined as short-term, intermittent, a direct cause of something, and alleviates after that direct cause is removed. But what we tend to do as human beings, as we always do, we tend to change definitions with clarifying words, right? Other adjectives. And so what do we often do? We put acute pain and chronic pain out there. Well, what's interesting about that is when we put chronic in front of the word pain, it materially changes the definition because it implies that it's not short-term, it's not intermittent, and it doesn't alleviate after that direct cause is removed. So instead, I want us to think about this differently. Instead of putting the word chronic pain in front of it, anything that is longer than short-term, intermittent, and still persists isn't pain at all. It's suffering. And we don't want to admit that suffering exists in our lives, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices, right? So let's look at this concept to understand just what do I mean when I say embrace pain to avoid suffering. I'm going to give 4 examples because these are ones we can relate to across the board. We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by taking away their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation that we'll never get back. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with our spouse to avoid the suffering of a loveless marriage that might end up in divorce, or ultimately being stuck in a marriage when divorce is really what we want. We can also, as business owners, fire our top salesperson, who's the greatest top-line contributor in our business, to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth and losing all of our other top talent because they're the biggest cancer in our culture. You see, the reality of it is like this applies to everything in our life, but we are so conditioned to avoid those moments of pain, to avoid those moments of discomfort. And I believe that we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us. And so what I'm really encouraging us to do is, and we've got 3 steps that we walk through on this. We may get to it today, we may not, depending on where the conversation goes. But the reality of it is this is one of the most crucial things towards building towards our pathway to success.
And yeah, I mean, really, my first question would be like, okay, that's great. If we first understand that we need to start embracing the pain, but how do I actually get started, right? Is there like some kind of daily process I can do, right, to work through that? As soon as I first realize, okay, I have this issue that I need to work through, how do I actually go about doing it on a regular basis, right?
Absolutely. So, there's obviously multiple different steps, but I'll hit on the 3 that I think are most important. First, we have to start by acknowledging the suffering that we wish to avoid. And sometimes that sounds a little backwards. So people are like, wait a minute, I have to define suffering in my future life. But what that really means is if we're really clear on what's important, if we're really clear on who we are, we're really clear on the things that we want to accomplish, then anything that's opposite of that is suffering, right? So you and I might be sitting here today and say, hey, I want to be able to play sports at a high level with my kids well into my 60s so that I'm in a position to also play with my grandkids, depending on ages and timing, whatever, right? So if I don't embrace the pain of keeping myself healthy, eating right, keeping movement into my life, making sure that I can maintain my overall health, right, then I will ultimately suffer because I won't be able to fulfill that dream and promise. If I want to build a business that generates opportunity for 100 people, right, and I want to really be able to give people the autonomy and freedom to have those types of opportunities in their life, and I view myself as the ability to build that, I have the skill set, I have the things. If I don't embrace the pain of all the things that are necessary to do that, and I can't ever build my business beyond a solopreneur or 2 to 3 of us, right? Not accomplishing that can be a source of great suffering. So I always say, acknowledge the suffering that we wish to avoid, because it is the counter to getting clear on who we are and what we want to accomplish in our lives. The second step is to identify the pains that we tend to avoid and learn to embrace them. So I'm going to give 2 examples on this, because again, these are things that a lot of us can relate to. I will tell you, I have an imbalance in my body. I literally have a curve in my spine because I don't have a lat on the left side of my back. I don't have a tricep, and my bicep is my gracilis from my leg. I have immediate imbalance, which didn't affect me for a long time in my life. But 12 to 15 years ago, as I started getting older, I started having more pain, and the pain started shifting into suffering. I mean, it was debilitating at points. And so what did I do? I learned that if I stayed lean, if I ate the right food, if I keep my body active and I focus a lot on core strength in general, then the suffering is reduced. It might still be a pain that I deal with on a regular basis, but it wasn't debilitating, it wasn't suffering, it wasn't ever persisting. So I joined a gym. That's the most logical thing to do when you know you need to move out and stay in good health, right? I started going to the gym, and after about a month, I stopped going. And I had to ask myself the question, was it the pain of working out that I was avoiding? Or was it the anxiety of working out in a crowded gym? And for me, it was very, very clear it was the second one, right? And so I had to embrace the pain of creating the space, time, investment in my house to build out a home gym so I could keep myself active to do those things. Anybody who's an entrepreneur, a business owner, a salesperson, they're going to understand and relate to this next one, right? There's call hesitancy that sometimes come into place. We see that 500-pound telephone that's right in front of us, and so many people are like, hesitant to pick up the phone and generate those cold calls and build connections, relationships, opportunities. Well, I was having a conversation with somebody over the last couple of weeks, and this was one of their biggest hurdles. So we had to really dig deep and understand, is it literally the hesitation of picking up the phone and talking to new people, building relationships, potentially adding value into their lives that you're avoiding? No, it wasn't. In her case, it was she literally had a fear of what success would look like. She was afraid of what it would look like if she was successful because she'd failed in so many other areas in her life that there was an emotional block and a trigger. So we unpacked that, we worked through that, and guess what? She's picking up the phone as if there's no hesitation anymore. Both of those examples, it's just ironic that those are both emotional triggers and behavioral patterns. And in a lot of the work that we find, what keeps people in those self-defeating paths is not the actual tactics that they have to deploy on, it's some block inside of who they are that's keeping them from deploying on those tactics. So we have to identify the pains we tend to avoid and learn to embrace them. Because I'm not encouraging us to put ourselves in unnecessary amounts of pain just for the sake of pain, but we have to identify the ones that are crucial in our pathway to success, right? Those 2 examples highlight that. And then lastly, we have to establish as a habit in all areas of our life. So when you talk about, is there a daily practice? Is there something that I can do? The answer is yes, right? If we start to view this as a philosophy that's going to drive us where we want to go, right? We can start to realize that the pains we have to embrace become less painful the more often we do it. Experts in habit formation will tell you, right, that there is what they call an upfront energy tax with any new habit. And so we view it that way often, right? That's why New Year's resolutions fail. That's why like so many things happen is people come in and it's immediately viewed as a tax, a cost, an expense in their day, whether it be by time, money, or energy, right? But the reality of it is if we flip that on its head and we start to view these things as an investment in our future self, and we're very, very clear on who we are, what we want to accomplish, we know the pains that we need to embrace along the way, right? It becomes much easier because we start to recognize it as an investment in our future self. So those three steps typically help people get on this path.
So let's go back a little bit to your first company, right? So how did that come about? Like, how did you, let's even talk about how it even started and then go through that growth process, right? So how did you start that first company? It sounded like you had a couple partners and all that. So let's talk about that.
We were blessed that there was a larger platform, but we ultimately were a series of LLCs. And so we were a startup, but we had a bigger platform, but that didn't mean or guarantee success, right? We were an unknown entity in this market. So we had a platform to build off of, but we didn't have the people, the structure, the resources. We just had the platform. And so, when I started there was 2 of us and $250,000 of revenue. The team of people that they brought in right before us that had really tried to build this over the course of 2 years really didn't, right? And so we had to really look at what's the value proposition? How do we deploy this into the marketplace? And how do we continue to leverage and scale so that this really can be a profitable, growing, building business? And so when I started, right, this was one of those things where literally I knew that this was going to be something where if I needed to take out the trash, I was going to take out the trash. If I needed to pick up the phones, I was going to pick up the phones, right? I knew that this was a part of building something, and I couldn't operate like I did in the prior 5 years at a bigger entity where we had resources and people to jump in and do everything. This was, hey, entrepreneur mindset. We're going to literally build this from the ground up. And so I was there for about a year, maybe just less than that, when we brought in another partner who he and I went shoulder to shoulder for a number of years. And we were kind of the silent ninjas running around in Phoenix, taking down big deals because nobody saw us coming, right? And we just had to backfill a lot of the things that normally we would have support around. And we had to lead with revenue so that we could then invest in the right people so that we could scale ourselves. The hard part about scaling any business, right, is that when you look at it, we as business owners, entrepreneurs, the leaders of the companies often have this belief that we're the guy or the gal. Like, we have this belief that we're more important than we are. And so part of that is we've got to embrace the pain of recognizing that, like, we are not good at everything that we do. And even if we're the ones who generate the relationship, are the ones that build the trust, are the ones that come in and start building it from the ground up, the faster we get those things off our plate, the better. Because then we can go do what we do best, which is open up doors, build relationships, add value. And so there was multiple turning points over the course of the 10 years that we built this, where we as partners had to sit around the table and be like, dude, you're micromanaging these people. Get out of the way, right? Hey, the only way we're going to grow and scale is if you're focused on the areas that we need to, which is growing our business and maintaining key relationships with our existing clients. Get out of the weeds of, right, when you bring on a new client, how do you transition? And so there was 4 partners ultimately over the course of the first few years that we ended up bringing in. It was the 4 of us that built this primarily, with amazing teams that we were able to scale and build over time. I mean, I'm just going to own it. All of our teams were way smarter and way more capable than any of us. We were just the dumb ones that knew how to open up doors, right? And so, but there were growing pains, right? There were times where we didn't have the right resources on the floor, and we had to backfill it, figure it out, do things differently, and sometimes sell a belief based on faith that we weren't sure we could deliver on, but we sure figured it out pretty quickly, right? And if we did one deal in one industry, we were experts all of a sudden. So, like, the reality of it is, it's like there was a lot of growing pains over that period of time and a lot of conversations, and we had to change and mold our behaviors as the leaders multiple times to make sure that our teams trusted us, our teams would run through walls for us, and that we could show up and do what we did best.
So everything is going well, right? How do you leave and start your own thing, right? So I'm sure there's a story there. So how did that transition happen?
Yeah. So, I started my coaching and speaking business about 6 years ago. What got me into it, frankly, is I hired my first coach about 7 years ago. Woke up one day after having our son, and 6 months went by like that. And I realized I didn't adjust anything in my life. I was burning the candle at both ends. I always wanted to provide everything for my family. It was one of the first times in my life that I didn't have the mentors or people in my life, nor did I feel like I had the skill set or smarts to figure it out myself. So I went out and interviewed a bunch of coaches and landed on one. And within a month of working with him, he goes, Bogert, you got to be doing this. And I said, yeah, whatever. I'm paying you a lot of money not to tell me how great I am, but help me figure out these other things. I don't need to add something else to my plate. And he goes, no, man, you've been on stage since you were age 7. Like, you naturally coach and elevate people and businesses. Like, you're a builder. You find ways to connect dots and help people overcome. And I said, yeah, whatever. Right. I literally dismissed it. And he trickled it with me for about 9 months. And that's when I jumped in. I tell you that because I think that's important context to realize, right? I had this running side by side for about 5 years. And I didn't necessarily have visions or aspirations of going out and doing this full time. I figured if I could do both at a high level, I would. And that's kind of where it was. A lot of good came from that time and the focus. And the more I coached people, the more I realized I wanted to be coaching people. The more I was on stage, the more I realized I wanted to be on stage. I had some other health stuff that took place, which I won't go into detail on, but it rattled me a few years back. I had multiple doctors tell me I was perfectly healthy, and I just knew I wasn't. Fatigue and cognitive dysfunction, brain fog were there. And anybody who knows me for 5 minutes know that my energy and my intellect are two things that I identify deeply with as a part of my identity. So we get through that. I'm doing well. And about last July, my wife and I went away for a weekend, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. Like, we were in sync that weekend. It's one of the best we've had in 14 years together. We're driving back to pick up the kids, and she looks over at me and says, how'd you feel if you didn't have to go to the office on Monday? And, you know, I get goosebumps every time I tell this story. And I say, that's a pretty loaded question, dear. Like, why don't you tell me more? And she said, well, I think you allowed this health stuff in this most recent period to allow fear to enter into your world in a way I've never seen it affect you. And she said, I think that you've convinced yourself that we need the money, the financial security, the status, the prestige of having built this business. And she said, I'm here to tell you that we don't. She said, I also think that every day you're in insurance, you're dying a little bit inside and you don't see it. So she said, I don't care if we live in a cardboard box. What I care about most is that you are good, you are fulfilled, and you're doing the things that you want. And she said, I also don't think you're even scraping the surface of your potential, nor do I think you're having even close to the impact on the world that you want. So she said, we took a big bet on you once and it paid off. And she said, there's not another person on this planet I would rather bet on than you. So if you want to double down on that bet, say the word. I was flooded with fear and emotions and all of this stuff. And it's not lost on me the courage it took for my wife to tell me all of that. And she threw a dart and hit the bullseye, was way more clear in that moment than I was. And that began the process. So last September, I put the wheels in motion with our CEO, our COO, and all my business partners. And ultimately said, we're going to do a 9 to 10 month transition because we were mid fiscal year. And I had made a commitment to the company. I'd made a commitment to our associates. And if I decided to leave mid-year, that would impact a lot of people from a budgetary standpoint. And that's not how I would choose to leave. And it was very clear to me that I wasn't running away from anything. I mean, on the surface, honestly, Daran, like everybody was like, oh my God, like you've got it great. Like you're living the American dream. You're making all this money. You're doing this. You're impacting lives. You've grown a business. You were a partner at a super young age. And like, it's been a really cool, phenomenal path. And the reality of it is it's like, I had to ask myself through the lens of the regret minimization theory, right? When I'm 80 years old, sitting on the beach with my wife, reflecting back on our life, what will I regret more? Hitting the easy button and staying where I was at because it was a lot of money and we had organic, natural growth of double digits every year, or taking a chance to go really chase what I believe I'm put on this planet to do. And, I looked at that through that lens, and that was an easy answer. And I never want my kids to witness me ever take the easy path. That would go counter to my philosophy of embracing pain, right? So I literally went through and I had a set of standards that I wanted to exit on. And I took a 9-month window, was working 100+ hours a week, which I don't say that proudly. It was a period of time that is not sustainable. I'm not one of those that's like, the harder you work, like blah, blah, blah. Like there's a very healthy balance to rest and stress in life that we need to turn into. But in this case, I was like, this is a sprint, because if I can set the foundation even greater for where I want to head and I can exit on the right terms, then I'm going to feel really good about the closing of this chapter. And that's ultimately what happened. And so May 31st, I executed the buy sell. It was my last day in insurance. And I've been chasing this hard ever since. It's been a blessing. And I'm so happy, brother.
Congratulations on that. So your wife obviously gave you that push to go over the ledge, right? I get asked this a lot of how to start a company or how to leave the corporate job. I even had troubles with this, even though I've owned companies before having a corporate position. It took me way too long to leave. and you've already touched on a few ways to kind of position yourself to take that leap of faith. But can you, any more tips or tricks that you could talk about for somebody who wants to start their own company or do their own thing, or even just leave their job for another one, right?
Yeah. So although I'm very instinctual in a lot of things, to the point where like often I'll make a decision and just put it into action. This is a major move for anybody, right? To walk away from the security of either a business that's built or a salary that you're getting from another company. Like it's not a small thing to consider. I put in the work, and when my wife told me this in July, and I told you I didn't notify him until September, October, it's because in that period of time, I literally took myself on an intrinsic journey. And I also did external analysis on factors that I may or may not have control over. So what I mean by that is I had to really go deep and ask myself the questions on, who am I, right? I already felt like I knew the answer to that, but I needed to get even further clarity, because if I'm going to have to change even roles in this world, like how will that look? What will that look like? What do I really want to do from an impact standpoint? And started to create really a vision for where I wanted to take this thing. I also started really significantly investing in what was really just an organic, great side business that stuff came to me. I'd never turned the growth switch on, right? Stuff had come to me through my network, through relationships that I had built. And so I had to start really looking at, okay, where and how do I build and scale in this type of a business? I think relationships, value, and impact, which are three things that I've always focused on, are sole focuses for me right now, translate into this world as well. And so, but I had to figure out, how do I actually build the platform? What are the different product offerings that I have, right? Outside of just one-to-one coaching or speaking. How do we scale this? Because what I was already running into is on my side, right? Not everybody could afford me one-to-one, but they wanted to tap into the philosophy. So how do we scale this with other coaches, other thought leaders, other content, so that we can really kind of get out there? And then I also had to answer a few questions around, I've always had a very big philanthropic and altruistic side to me. I had to answer that question. I'm in a position where I've got monetary goals on things that I want to donate into the community. That meant taking a step back from some of the stuff that I wanted to really look at, how do I scale and grow this business so it can maintain that philanthropic, altruistic nature of giving? When I tell you I want to impact 1 billion people in the next 25 years, I know that 99.99999 of those will never pay me $1. So how do I create impact and add value into the world, and just know and trust that when I do that right, my paying clients will more than subsidize the 99.99999 lives that I'm going to impact and never touch? The last thing is be intentional, right? I did a 7-year cash flow analysis with extreme bookend comparatives to really know, hey, based on our savings, based on the money that we've been able to sock away, based on my buy sell, based on all these things, like what is my runway? Know what that looks like. Like don't just like throw a ball up in the air and be like, oh, I'm just going to hit it, right? I mean, yes, that can work in some cases, but standing a business up is way more work, way more difficult than I think most people realize. And understand too that I've never been a believer in work-life balance. I'm a believer in work-life integration. But as an entrepreneur and as a business owner, it's even more so, where it's constantly on your mind. Like there is sometimes no ability to shut it off. And so you have to really make sure that if you're married, right, you've got a spouse, a partner in life, whatever that looks like for each individual, that you both are understanding, what are the sacrifices we're going to make on this path? Are we both in this together? What communication is necessary? Because I'm here to tell you, it's not lost on me the push my wife gave me. But if what I was about to do was going to sacrifice what my wife and I have, what I have with my kids, none of that would be worth it. Right. And so you just get clarity on all these things. I think those would be the tips I'd leave people with is, sometimes we can act based on instinct and just like make an aggressive move. I don't know that this is the place to do that. Although others have and have been very successful. I think that's why so many businesses fail, is they don't put in the work to lay the foundation to build off of.
Yeah, I mean, you get, if you can't build that foundation, then you're going to have a tough time running a business as well. So go, and a lot of times what I'll say is actually just start going through those steps that you said, because those require almost no money action, right? You're just
none of it costs money.
Exactly. Yeah, you're modeling, you're doing stuff in your head to kind of figure out what you'll have, your visionary, you're putting together a vision. Let's also talk about, you do a lot of keynote speeches, a bunch of stuff like that. A lot of people would have fear of speaking or getting in front, even just getting on this podcast.
Yeah.
Any thoughts there of how somebody could get over some of those hurdles?
Yeah. So, I think there's like really, really deep rooted fears sometimes that will literally keep people stuck. And I'm not going to touch on that because that typically requires a lot more intervention. But I think that for most people, right, there's a fear of being exposed, being vulnerable, saying something wrong, tripping over your words. And like anything in life, like the more reps you get, the more natural it becomes. And so, when I look at those moments of discomfort, those moments of pain, right, we talk about embracing pain to avoid suffering. Brene Brown in Dare to Lead actually outlined that she did this analysis for herself. And those moments of discomfort, right, with a difficult conversation, a tough decision, a new business venture, like something that just she had fear of, was feeling stuck, maybe her shame was in the way, right? And I've done the same type of thing with very similar results. So I reference Brene Brown because it's a credible source, it's booked in a book and all these things. But what she noticed is that those moments of discomfort typically last about 8 seconds. I noticed it's typically in that 8 to 10 second range. And so if you have a hesitancy to get on stage, like, yes, do some prep. Yes, do some practice. Like, don't go wing it if it's your first time. But the reality of it is like, I have a client. I'm going to use this example because it's going to answer this question. She's like a perfectionist, and it was a shame-based perfectionism. And she was always in this lens of like, she never wrote a first draft. And what that means is that she wouldn't do something unless she knew she would be successful, unless she knew she would crush it. And so she literally only started projects that she knew she could do a final draft. So whether that's a video, a podcast, a writing material, something in business. And when she started to realize like you actually refine and your outcome becomes greater when you actually have multiple reps, when you have multiple failures, when you have perspective. And so with her, the key coin that we came up with, and it's the same thing for people who want to speak, for her, it was just turn the camera on and start talking. Right? If you want to have an opportunity and you think you've got a valuable lesson that people can benefit from, get on a stage and start talking. Get on a podcast and start talking, right? Practice it if you need to in some dry runs if you want to, but like just start talking. I will tell you every time I get on stage, it's not so much the case on podcasts, but sometimes, but every time I get on stage in front of a live audience, every time my nerves hit me. Every time. And I've done it countless times, right? Every time I feel that. And I get up, and as soon as I get through my first or second sentence, I settle in. And the nerves just go away. Now, that might not be the case for every single person, but those 8 to 10 seconds is what I'm telling you. Just embrace the pain, turn the camera on and start talking, get on stage and start talking. So let's talk about my podcast experience being a host here. I'm not the personality to be really good at this. A lot of people would disagree with that because they only see the external, right? And there's a reason why my first question's like the easiest question ever and quick. It's just to get it started and then back up because, and then now we're in it, right? So, and then that goes away and then it's, you're not as nervous then. But I still get nervous, but I push myself through it. I also go through the motions of like, let's book, get more people booked, try to get bigger and bigger people to be guests on the show. Because if you go through those motions, you end up getting them. So you have to you have to show up. Right. Then you're committed to it. Exactly. Yeah. And there's been times where I like even wish that people would cancel, but then they don't. And then there you go. Now we're here, right? You're not gonna undo it. I kind of lost my train of thought with that, but let's go into your corporate trainings and stuff like that. So like, what's that even look like? So when we talk about, coaches, it goes such a big range. So where is kind of your sweet spot when you're talking about actual like people who have day jobs, right? Like they're in the middle in the company or even higher up in a company. Where do you help people who work for somebody else? Yeah. So in my one-to-one work, I typically am working with that C-suite or high-level executive, high-performing salespeople. And then I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, right? Because it's just both schools of thought exist. There are situations where, in my one-to-one work, there's individuals that are just of growth-minded. So although I say that's generally the case, there are other people who just view it as an investment and they're growth-minded, they want to put in the work. Put that aside for a second though, because I think the one-to-one work, there's a limited number of spaces. The corporate trainings, the group coaching platforms, those are really scalable. And that's where we can kind of come into play. So I'll do things from literally leadership development strategy type retreats to help people and organizations really nail down who they are as a company, where they want to head. But then we also do this on an individual level where we're working with groups of people at different leadership levels or sales levels within an organization. I'm a big believer that everything in life begins with the who, and the what is a manifestation of the who. I don't care if you're working in a large organization, a corporate culture, or whatever. Typically, even though they're going to have some culture and theme that they want you to become a part of, they're also hiring you for you. And so the more we get to that true, autonomous, core, radical, authentic self in a place that we can allow who you are to shine, the better. And what we do as well is also build it in from a cultural perspective, because we always start with kind of purpose, legacy. Who am I today? Who do I need to become? We look at a 3 to 5 year vision, and what is that vision for that period of time? What are the strategic objectives? What's imperative, right? So it's imperative for me to be. For me, one of those is it's imperative for me to have leverage in my life. So I always ask myself 3 questions. Is this something that only I can do? Is this something that someone else can do? Is it something that even needs to be done? And I run everything I do through that triage, because I find 90% of it fits in the latter 2, which means sometimes as a business owner, I'm going to have to do it anyway. But at least if I go into it that intent, I know this is either something only I can do or not. Then we break it down into an annual theme. And what are the priorities that need to situate with a bunch of trigger questions to help understand, how do we measure success? Where are we going? What is this tied to? How does this connect to the work that we just put above it? And down to quarterly emphasis in both personal, professional, and in community service to others, so that we really understand that we're building a plan for this person in their life to create alignment. But also when they do that, they are better able to perform in their business. And this happens across the board. We see it frequently, all the way down to daily disciplines, which we talked about earlier. When we then can identify, right, what are the 2 or 3 things I can do in each category of my life that will really move me towards success, where I want to head personally, professionally, financially, in service to others, right? Mentally, spiritually, physically, like you name it. When we take that holistic, aligned approach, that's when people start to become free and they can live with no limits. It also becomes a self-regulating process, because you know what fits and what doesn't. So when we lead teams in organizations through this, it changes the philosophy from, right, we are this entity, to yes, we are this entity and we have this common vision and goal. But as each individual contributor, we get clarity on what's important, who we are, what do I need to do to be successful, and we know what else is noise, so we can collaborate effectively together.
We talked about some rituals before. What's an average day in the life of your life, right? What kind of rituals do you have daily?
It's a great question. And this has evolved over time, but I'll tell you where it stands today. So I get up every morning between 4 and 4:30. I say between 4 and 4:30 because I give myself the window if I need a little bit of extra sleep. But the reality of it is I believe that mornings are the only time of day that I have 100% control of my time, right? Before clients are reaching out to me, before my wife and kids need me, before, right, I'm out there doing whatever I'm doing. And so that 2.5 hours, the first 2 to 2.5 hours of my day, is 100% focused on the things I need to do for me. And so some people are like, oh, wait, that's selfish. Well, it's the least selfish thing I can do, because it puts me in the best position to be set up for success, to carry the burdens and help alleviate pain and suffering for other people. So the very first 30 minutes, literally, I roll out of bed and I immediately come into my office gym casita. I sit down in my meditation spot and I meditate for 30 minutes a day, right? Sometimes there's a focus on concentration. Sometimes it's actual meditation. Sometimes it's visualization, but it's sitting there with myself to just be in my body and be quiet and allow that to take place. My doing self has always superseded my being self. And so over the last few years, I've really found like the integration and necessity of both. I immediately then move into body work. And I do typically 30 minutes of stretching and percussion therapy with my Theragun, because with my body and my structure, if I don't do that regularly and consistently, I literally get rigid as a board and that pain becomes suffering. I also follow that then by my physical activity, right? So working out, whether that's weightlifting, some cardio, riding my road bike, running, swimming, whatever the case may be, it immediately follows there. And then I also bring in journaling, planning for my day, getting myself prepped. So I spend 2.5 hours every day and I hit on all 4 categories that I care about: mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, right? When I hit all 4 of those, I move things into conscious level of awareness. It allows me to be intentional in every moment of my day.
Sorry to interrupt, but a lot of people say, I don't have 2.5 hours, right? You know, like for their day. And you know, I think one way to look at that is, and I'm guessing the rest of your day is going to be extremely packed and busy as well, is look, maybe you just have to get up earlier or go to bed later, you know?
Yeah. And so here's the thing. When I say 2.5 hours now, that's after 6, 7 years of refining this process. It started with 30 minutes, right? Let's do the math on this. Like I guarantee you, everybody can find 30 minutes in their day. Guarantee you there's 30 minutes of waste. Okay. I have very little waste in my day, right? There are moments that are very intentional rest periods. And so it's not about not sitting or not being, because I have that built in, but I have very little like just downtime, right? But it started with 30 minutes. Let's do the math, right? Like think about the compound effect of this. Like how many people are like, oh, I want more vacation. I want more time with my friends. I want more time to focus on my side hustle. I want more time to focus on my health, right? And everybody's always like, I don't have time. 30 minutes a day. Let's just look Monday through Friday. It's 5 days a week. That's 30 minutes a day, 2.5 hours a week, 10 hours a month, 120 hours a year, right? Depending on how often you work, whether it's a 40 or 60 hour work week, that's 4 to 6 weeks. Sorry, I did the math wrong on that. That's 2 to 3 weeks that you've given yourself back in your day or in your year. So it's not so much about like time's the only thing we can't create more of, but we can cheat the system. And again, when I did this and I did it regularly and consistently, I found that the more I spent time focusing in those 4 buckets, setting myself up for success, the faster I was able to move with less effort in the rest of my day. So I could compress more volume into the same period of my working hours that I define if I set myself up properly. Again, it's about laying the foundation. If I lay my foundation every single day, I can build on top of it. If I don't set that foundation, the day starts to crumble. And so I found that to be very effective for me, but I guarantee you everybody can find 30 minutes a day. And yeah, it might be getting up earlier, but I'm not also a sleep shamer, right? Like I'm one of those that literally is going to say, you need to honor how much your body needs sleep. So if it's not on the sleep side that you cut out, which is the case for so many, where are you wasting 30 minutes, right? That's not adding or contributing or serving where you want to head in your life.
Yeah. I think a lot of people that are, streaming Netflix all night, you could replace that. I also think even, and this is the 30-minute thought process, is even if you just are intentional with your day, I like to have, at least 1 to 3 kind of, hey, if I accomplish these things and I do this in the morning, I'll be happy. And sometimes those things can be pretty easy stuff, but I also want to know that like, I want to end the day feeling fulfilled for that day, right? I want to be happy that I did what I wanted to do as opposed to just getting bogged down by emails, right?
And that's what those daily disciplines are about, right? So those are the personal things. One of the other things in my personal bucket is what I call Ashley's Big Five. She's my wife, right? And so that's like holding her hand, touching her hair, sending her intentional daily text messages, checking in on different things. Like I hit those parts. So you talked about my day. Typically then my day, right, starts between 8 and 9, depending on the day. And it's jam-packed, right? Typically for like 10 hours, sometimes 12, it depends on the day. But I have dinner with my kids 5 to 6 nights a week without fail, because that is something that is absolutely very important to me. So I shut off typically by 5 or 5:30 every night. I go inside, and the following hour and a half to 2 hours is exclusively focused on my kids and my wife. We have dinner together. I do bedtime all those same nights as well with my kids. I've got a 5 and a 6-year-old. Like to me, those are routines and rituals that I'm not willing to sacrifice. Sometimes they happen, right? Sometimes I'm traveling. Sometimes I've got a dinner. Like it happens. But if I do it more often than I don't, it's really important, because those are memories, again, I'm going to have with my kids forever and with my wife. Typically then after bedtime, my wife and I will separate for somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes. I'll typically do like my day end triage, right? Like get to the stuff that's absolutely urgent, the stuff that I need to, but I'm typically shut off, like non-responsive for almost everything, text, email, or phone calls after about 8 p.m. because that's where my wife and I spend the next period of time together. Sometimes just talking. Sometimes we will watch a show together and wind down. And I'm typically in bed between 9 and 9:30. So I can get my full 7 to 7.5 hours of rest a night. I used to be the guy that got 4, right? And burn the candle on both ends. And my equation used to be stress equals growth. The more I pushed myself, the greater my capacity was, the more I could grow. It burned me hard. And now my equation is stress plus rest equals growth. And it's not about how much we sleep or how little we sleep. It's what do we do with the time that we're awake.
So what's your approach to, your marketing or business development, right? So how do you get clients? How do you get new clients, right?
Yep. Traditionally it was all organic and referral based, and through my network, which was great. And I told you I hadn't turned the growth switch on. So I had a steady flow of speaking opportunities and coaching for 5 years. But I only had so much capacity while running this other business. When this switched, right, I went back into the offense, which is building relationships, value, and impact. Like literally, that's all I'm focused on. So I'm collaborating with new people. A big funnel that I honestly completely, to my own discredit, devalued podcasts and some of the virtual stuff. And so, when we went live, pandemic, COVID came, everybody's like, oh, are you going to change your decision? Are you going to delay your timeline? I said, no, I'm clear and convicted on where I head. The business model might look different. The business plan might look different. The growth might look different, but I know where I'm headed. And I also know what my runway is. So I had that buffer. But I shifted hard, right? I had only maybe done a handful of podcasts. I'd never done a virtual summit. Nobody knew what a virtual summit or a virtual keynote was, right? They were all in person. But I did, and you and I were jamming on this before we jumped on to record. I looked at how am I going to show up in this scenario, right? I want to make sure, because first impressions matter, right? Typically beyond a couple of minutes, like you can overcome first impressions. But I said, okay, if I'm going to differentiate in this space, I can differentiate in a technological world with technology. So I invested in building out a true virtual studio. I've got a 5-point light setup with where this is. My background, which is now on version probably 6 or 7, right? Where I've like refined to figure out what do I actually want behind me? What do I want on those shelves? That's where that is. It's 6 or 7 feet behind me. You're 6 or 7 feet in front of me. And so you're on a DSLR camera, obviously, but you're also on a 50-inch screen. The reason I did that is so much of what I do in human behavior and performance coaching is reading people, leveraging my emotional intelligence to see the micro expressions, little things that pick up on the face and body language and connotation of voices where it's like, I needed to see the other people clearly. But because my image was set up, people can consume me as clearly as possible, right? And I've actually won a virtual keynote where I was down to the finalist. I think all things else were equal. And the company said, look, our people are going to see you better, hear you better, and consume you better because of the quality of your technology.
I also think it gives me confidence too, that I have a setup that I'm proud of, right?
Yeah.
And I think spending a little time in that is important because you're going to be in front of a lot of different people. Let's try. It doesn't have to be as high quality as what you and I would have.
No. But
just at least a little bit of your personality comes out, right? With your backdrop and how you do it, right?
100%. And it has been a differentiator. And the number of times I get onto a podcast and they're like, oh my gosh, like, what are you doing with your setup? I mean, I've shared the literal full detailed setup with literal like YouTube videos on like things that I had to learn because I knew nothing about photography, right? And I couldn't bring a contractor in to set it up for me. So I literally had to invest the time to learn it so that I could set up a structure. But I've shared the email now with tons of people. But where I was going with the podcast piece is, I was like, I'm going to dabble in this a little bit, not really understanding where I was going to head with it. And chased, 10 to 12 podcasts, landed most of them, which was cool. And it just took off from there. I mean, each one of those translated into 5 to 6 new opportunities. In the last 4 months, I've now done over 90 podcasts and I've got another 15 already booked in the next 2 weeks. And I don't say that to impress Daran. I say it to impress upon the point. Like I completely discredited podcasts, but I said, you know what, where and how can I differentiate here? And it's blown my mind as it relates to reach. I've had more conversations with some of the coolest people I've ever met on the planet. I've been on podcasts based in the UK, Australia, India, right? And followers from around the globe are now starting to connect with me from places that I would have never thought, right? In my traditional stage route in the Southwest of the United States, right? The reach has gotten far greater. And I'm collaborating on business opportunities now as a result of it and things that are based in coaching and non-coaching. And so, I think the more we can put ourselves out there, and again, I'm focusing on relationships, value, and impact. I've said that a few times, but every time I show up to a podcast, right, I want to understand who is their ideal audience. Who do I know in my network that can add value to their show and their audience? And like just making selfless introductions has catapulted this to like another level. And it's generating opportunities that are now feeding the business in ways that I didn't anticipate before. And so, I'm doing that. I'm leveraging some different things around social media strategies, content. Obviously, I put a ton of content out because I just really want to help people. And whether or not they consume me or my content or ever pay me, I know it'll have an impact. And I believe that to my core. So the hesitation is gone. It's full on action towards focusing on impact. I've got 25 years to impact 1 billion lives. That's taking all of my energy, focus, intellect to really dial that in and refine my processes so that I can have a solid sales system, so that I can serve the people that really want that deep work, and I can impact the lives of people who can't ever afford to invest in it.
What about people that want to get in the world of coaching? And there's so many different areas of coaching, so it doesn't really matter. What are some ways, because you just kind of now have gone all in on this, right? What are some thoughts on how they could, maybe some stuff that worked for you, or some stuff that didn't work, anywhere you want to take it?
Yeah. So I'm going to start by saying, there's like a gazillion coaches out there, and there's a bunch of like fake gurus, and there's a bunch of slime balls that are selling like horrible courses and things that really, like, they're just focused on revenue generation, not transformation for people.
That's going to happen in every industry though.
Like, it is going to happen in every industry. I think it's just been highlighted, like how much it exists here. Over the last couple of years, it's really strong. So I think the first thing for people who want to get in coaching, I really want you to look at it through, why are you doing it? That's the first question I would ask, because if it's just to make money, I don't think that's a compelling enough reason to really drive you to embrace the pain that's necessary to really go after what it is. And this isn't like, you can have some quick wins for sure, but it's really hard as a solopreneur in the very beginning. It's really hard, like, to recognize that you're also trading time for money and a lot of different things. So you've got to be very thoughtful about why, so that you can overcome the discomfort of all of those moments of growth and scaling. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, understand, like, where do you have expertise and relevance based on your story, right? And I think that that's really important, whether it's professional background, personal story, emotional intelligence, right? Really understanding human connection, understanding human emotions, human behavior, like whatever the case may be. Or are you a fitness coach? Are you a nutrition coach? Are you a very specific podcasting coach? Like, understand, like, where do you have relevance and credibility, where you can tell your story in a way that's effective to really be able to impact whoever's in your space. The other thing I would say is, there are some people who need a toolkit, right? They need a toolkit to build off of. And there's lots of coaching certifications and ways to go get that toolkit. I always want you to understand your why. I always want you to understand what your relatability and credibility, your relevance is, before you go down that path. Because if you just jump in and go get your toolkit, but you don't have those first two questions answered, then you're an inch deep and a mile wide, and you really aren't going to know where to go or how to do it. So I say that with no discredit. I think there's a ton of people who've hung their hats as coaches, who've gone and got certifications, but they really don't have relevance or credibility in anything, right? Or there's a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds who are like, I'm going to go be a life coach. What does that mean? Like, and by the way, that's not to say that at 19 or 20 you can't do that, but have you answered the why? Have you answered the relevance and credibility question? Then you get the toolkit. And then I would just say, it's like anything, right? You can jump in with both feet, certainly. Can you rip off the Band-Aid and just say, I'm going to jump full force into this? Yes. But I also think that, like, you should give yourself a little bit of a runway to test it, evaluate it, see if this lifestyle is what's best for you. See if being a coach and carrying the burden of so many other people is something that you've got the emotional maturity and resilience to handle. Seeing if you can actually do these things. So I know I gave a longer answer there probably than you were expecting, but I think it's really important that you begin with the why, understand relevance and credibility, figure out what tools you either need to tap into or build, and then figure out, like, is this really the path and the lifestyle that I want? I think if you go through that 4 questions, you'll be on the right path to decide, like, yeah, this is me or not. And you'll know the right time to jump in if it is.
I think you could take what you just said there and attribute that to starting a company, starting a business, doing a small business. I think it's the same thing, right? Because a lot of people just want to say they own a company or whatever, but they didn't go through those processes. What about, like,
and it's not all glorious, right? It is not all glorious. I mean, there and especially in the beginning, until you get teams around you, it can be lonely. It can be isolating. It's really difficult. And that's why so many businesses fail. But I think if you do the work up front, you've got a greater likelihood to succeed. And that's all I'm encouraging people to do. We can't guarantee success, but yeah, it's not all glamorous, but Instagram has made entrepreneurship sure look glamorous, right?
It's very true. I've owned companies with co-founders, and right now I'm just on my own. And I think I'll always do a co-founder again, because of just have somebody else on the island with you, right? Just to have, just have some company every once in a while, it would be nice. What about, so, growing up, obviously with your injury, what's some advice you'd give your 16-year-old self, right? What would you say to him?
So the period of life right after my accident was interesting. And so I'm going to give a little context and then answer that question. As I'm 7 years old, I remember sitting there and feeling sorry for myself in the bed when I was there in the ICU. And I remember feeling like, why me? Right. And it's really easy, I think, when trauma or crazy things happen for people to get stuck. And I was on a fine line where I almost got stuck. But then we had so many families coming up to us saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. What can we do to help? And then we come to learn that their kid in the ICU bed next to me has a terminal illness and doesn't know if they're going to live another month. Perspective points us at what's important. And so that knocked me out of that piece. But what also started to happen is I became the center of attention in a lot of ways. And I didn't want to be the center of attention. And I also started to become very intimately aware of the limits and boundaries other people were placing on me based on their own lens that they were viewing the world. And I refused to be defined by those limits and boundaries. And so at 16, I was well into the path of creating an external narrative, right? That I'm good, I'm tough, I can do anything, and I don't need anybody's help. And I proved that through a whole lot of things in my life with intellect and mental toughness alone. What I would tell myself at 16 would be, you need human connection. You need other people in your life. We all need help. And though the perspective pointed me in the right direction, I ended up learning that lesson the hard way at age 20, because I re-broke my arm in a snowboarding accident. Again, living my life to what I thought was no limits, probably wasn't a smart move given my prior injury, but I wasn't going to allow that to define me. Compound fracture, went 10 months with it hanging by my side. And I learned that the world had bought into my narrative. Nobody was there. It was one of the most vulnerable periods of my life, but they just believed Brian was good. He was strong. He was capable. He didn't need any of our help. And I didn't have the courage to ask for it. And so that would be what I would tell my 16-year-old self is, when I shut off physical pain, I shut off emotional pain. I also shut off the ability to really focus on human connection, because the external narrative I created was I didn't need it. And so I would have encouraged myself to really start the process of building my own emotional resilience, maturity, and really focusing on human connection earlier than I did. I'm a big believer that we can't necessarily change the path and everything happens for a reason. But had I been able to do that 4 years earlier, who knows what the trajectory would have looked like. And the emotional piece didn't come in until way later. So that would have been more than a decade of difference in that capacity. And so that's it, right? Human connection and emotions are important, and human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. That's what I would have told myself.
Any mentors or books that's helped you along the way with that path of being able to, enhance your connections with people or even just with yourself?
Yes, a lot. I read a lot. I probably consume a book a week. And I do that because I heard a quote 7 years ago that the only difference between who you are today and who you'll be 5 years from now is in the people that you meet and the books that you read, right? So it's what do you learn from other people and their collective wisdom, and what can you learn? Really, the book part is what knowledge you're putting through your brain, right? And so I started reading voraciously. I did have a very strong mentor early in my career who was very deeply involved in a lot of philanthropic causes. I mean, she was involved in almost everything major that happened in Phoenix over the last 40 to 50 years. She's just unbelievable. She's a powerhouse. She's totally unassuming. And she connected me with a lot of amazing people. And one of them said a comment to me pretty early on. He said, there's no limit to what one can accomplish as long as they care not who gets the credit. I mean, that's what that's all about, right? It's about human connection. It's about collaboration. It's about vulnerability. It's about not needing the credit. It's not about the image and the ego. It's about the impact. And so those started to happen. One of the most transformational books, though, because I want to answer that question too, I referenced it earlier. Brene Brown's Dare to Lead was very powerful for me. One of the things that I didn't realize was holding me back for a long time was shame. And that book really helped me unpack shame. And she outlines in that book very clearly. And the reason I couldn't identify it as shame in my own life is because most people think of shame as I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. And that's like the dominating narrative for shame in most cases. But the other narrative to shame is when you shut that down, you show up in the arena and you're ready to go to battle. It's, who do you think you are? Everything major I ever did, I felt the need to apologize for. I felt like I shouldn't live big. I shouldn't live beyond boundaries. I shouldn't do major impactful things because I didn't want other people to feel badly, right? That I was doing it and they weren't, or that I had the attention and they weren't. And it wasn't ever about me being better than somebody else. I just literally ratcheted myself back. And it shame's the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing because it literally boxes you in on both sides. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. Who do you think you are? And you only have this much wiggle room. And so that was one of the most profound things in really helping me bring vulnerability and authenticity and understanding of shame resilience into my life, because it was holding me back, right? I've done some majorly cool things in my life that nobody knows about. And they probably won't ever know about because I'm still not going to bring it up like 10 years later or 5 years later. But the reality of it is like, it's very damaging. So Dare to Lead, I think, is a really strong book for any leader who's looking at how do we build like real, authentic, vulnerable relationships that establish trust. Brene Brown's phenomenal.
Yeah. So what about you? You mentioned 5 years from now. So where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Whether it's personally or professionally, either which way you want to take it.
Hopefully I'm going to be 20% into my impact of 1 billion people, right? And when I say 20% in, that's not necessarily I'm going to have impacted 20% of those lives, but I do believe there's going to be an exponential effect that's going to come into play. I think that everything happens from a compound effect. I think 5 years from now, I'm going to be doing a lot of the same stuff that I'm doing today, but on a bigger level. Everything that I'm focused on right now is about impact. And what follows impact, right, from the business standpoint is revenue generation. I don't really care about the money or the dollars that are coming through my business today, other than how will it help support bringing leverage into my world and bringing other smart, capable individuals to help round out the story, have more people on our team, because that's only going to exponentially create a greater amount of impact. So where I'll be 5 years from now, I'm not going to talk numbers or specifics, but I hopefully will be surrounded by a bigger team than I even have today. And we're going to be well on our path to, getting to that 1 billion over the next 25 years. I think podcasting is still going to be a strong part of that. If I had a crystal ball, I will tell you that I'll probably have my own, certainly well underway before then. I hope that within the next 5 years that I will also actually get my first autonomous solo book out. I've been a contributor in other books, but I've got a couple concepts that I'm working on right now, and that I think is going to be a big way to scale and grow. Not a revenue generator, but an impact generator. And then just continuing to move forward on some of those same things. Reality of it is, though, I can have a vision for 3 to 5 years, and 100 variables can change. So what I'm focused on more than anything is that 1 billion impact number. And that path might look very different than what I think it is today. I'm very open to understanding and accepting that.
How did you come up with that goal of 1 billion people to be impacted?
I'm really big on what I call no limits goals, right? I think so often we protect ourselves with goals that we set, right? If we need to lose 20 pounds, we'll tell ourselves we're going to lose 10. And then if we lose 8, we feel good about it. But the reality of it is we still need to lose another 12 to be in our ideal weight. Whereas if we shoot out for 20 or 25, even if we miss that goal, we're going to typically outperform whatever was below it. And so this is a philosophy I have in lots of my initial planning. That does not mean that's what my 3 to 5 year visions are or my annual stuff is, but like the long, big, audacious ones. And the 1 billion number came from the fact that we've got 7.2 billion people on this planet. And I viewed 1 billion as a pretty significant chunk of that, which would indicate that we're moving the needle. When I say impact, right, like I want to reduce the suffering that exists in the world, because that is what allows joy, freedom, and fulfillment to come into people's lives. It's a difficult thing for them to coexist. The other piece about it is that there's 2.3 or 2.4 billion people that have access to technology, right? And so I looked at that and said, okay, the 1 to the 7.2, that's a big, meaningful number. But if I look at the modern world and people have access to this, it's an even bigger percentage of that number. And 1 billion is big enough that it's going to require all of me for the rest of my life to do it. And so that is really what I'm focused on. And the reality of it is I'll never know. I won't be able to measure that. But if I talk to you and you hear one thing that you like and you happen to share it, you and whoever you shared it with is a part of that 1 billion. Anybody consuming on this podcast or any other show or platform that I've been on is a part of that billion. And there's a ripple effect to that. And so I just genuinely believe if I focus on impact, relationships, values, and impact, it's going to happen, right? Like that's where I'm at. I'm just very clear and convicted on that's what I'm after in my life.
So my last question of the podcast is, how would you like to be remembered?
It's very connected to that impact. I want to first be remembered by my wife and kids as a thoughtful, active, engaged father and husband, right? That was there for the big moments, that allowed them to flourish into who they actually are versus being the person who, told them what they should do, who they should be, and added all those layers of damage onto my kids. If I can have that be the only thing I accomplish and that's what I'm remembered for, great. But immediately followed by that is the impact on the world. I would love to be known and remembered for reducing the suffering in the world. We have a ton of it right now. We have a ton of it in the world that we live in today. And I genuinely believe if we can reduce the amount of suffering, and if I can help people embrace the pains necessary to do that, that'd be a phenomenal legacy.
I love it. Well, Brian, it was a big pleasure to have you on the Establishing Your Empire podcast here. I really appreciate it. A lot of value. I mean, just a lot of great nuggets here. I really appreciate your time today.
Man, I appreciate the platform you've built and you being consistent with this, because like I said, that's the only reason I've got an opportunity to be a part of your audience. So thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right, man. Cheers.